My job is to introduce NEPA and explain how it fits into TEC, traditional ecological knowledge. NEPA was passed as one of a wave of environmental laws that emerged in the late 60s and transformed the American landscape. What does it take for Congress to pass a law? One motivation occurs when people die, and people have been dying from industrial pollution. In the run-up to the 70s, there had been many adverse health impacts from relatively unregulated pollution. The Cuyahoga River in Cleveland, Ohio was catching fire from all the chemicals dumped into it, and this was happening all across the U.S. Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, struck a chord in 1962 when it warned that unregulated use of chemicals, particularly the pesticide DDT, was killing off more than unwanted pests. So we have a cascade of environmental laws in the 70s and onward that successfully improved air and water quality and provided the framework for cleaning up contaminated sites. But we can go further than minimum standards for pollution. The federal government can lead by example, and Congress established NEPA to provide some type of environmental planning for all federal actions. NEPA establishes broad environmental goals for each and every agency, and more specific but still broad policy objectives, such as acting as trustee for future generations, preserving natural and historic resources, balancing economic and environmental values. Section 102 of NEPA applies to all federal agencies. 102A mandates an interdisciplinary approach. This is important because when we're building a highway, for instance, we can't just think about moving vehicles from point A to point B, but we must also consider other aspects of the highway's environmental impacts, such as how will the roadway noise interfere with adjacent neighborhoods? Will the roadway cut off part of an existing neighborhood from another? How will that affect residents in the community? Will it affect drainage? Will it demolish or otherwise adversely affect historic or natural resources? Section 102(b) tells us to place values on all issues, including those difficult to measure. For instance, the Tellico Dam in Tennessee was stopped in part because it would have destroyed the only known habitat of the snail darter, a small fish of unknown value. This means that traditional ecological values have a place in decision-making and cannot be dismissed because they cannot be monetized. Finally, Section 1022C called for a detailed statement, better known as an EIS, Environmental Impact Statement, for all major federal actions significantly impacting the human environment. This part of NEPA set up an environmental review for all projects with an environmental component, and NEPA acts as an umbrella for a host of other federal requirements, so compliance with these almost 24 environmental authorities are documented as part of the environmental review. NEPA defines environment very broadly to include a host of variables, including not just physical, but also social and aesthetic considerations. This is why TEC fits in. Environmental impacts are defined very broadly. Although federal law mandates an environmental assessment process, it generally lets the entity responsible for the environmental review select and apply the standards on a case-by-case basis, since each project is found in a different setting with different sets of circumstances. So let's summarize. How does NEPA fit into TEC? All projects with federal money or approval must comply with NEPA. That's a large part of the economy and often very significant projects that will affect you. Many projects have layered financing. If there is any federal money, the analysis and decisions will encompass even privately funded actions if there is federal money in any part of the overall project. So once you have NEPA, it opens the door for TEC. If you bring TEC up to the entity performing the NEPA review, whether DOE, BIA, DOT, or a tribe or community for HUD-funded actions, they must analyze and consider it. Once they consider that aspect, then if there are any adverse impacts, they must consider alternatives to minimize these adverse impacts.